All right, one last look at your traffic and weather for your ride in on this Tuesday morning. Looking around the city here, do have an accident at Broad River Road and I-20, as well as one I-20 eastbound at Monticello Road. So be careful as you're making your way through there. As far as weather goes, guess what? It's going to be hot. High of 93 today. Looks like some clouds throughout the day as well. Currently 80 in downtown Columbia. That's your traffic and weather on your Tuesday on the Game. Oh, 9 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head once again along with you, flying solo today. Jack Veltri will be back on Thursday as he's still probably celebrating the birthday and all that kind of stuff. We've got a lot to catch up with him on when he does return coming up later on this week. But plenty of things to get into on today's show. We'll certainly talk about the U.S. men's national team coming up here in a moment. We'll get into what Phil Steele had to say about South Carolina when he talked with Elijah and Preston yesterday morning on the early game. And also, we get our final opponent preview as far as Carolina for the regular season goes, with Chapel Fowler coming up at 9:30 as we'll put a bow on all 12 opponents for South Carolina. Again, just 60 days away from the season starting on September 5th against Kent State. But what I mentioned a moment ago, U.S. men's national team, season comes to an end. Last night, or their World Cup, not a season, a World Cup run comes to an end last night with a 4-1, just ugly loss to Belgium. And now for probably the majority of American citizens, your care for soccer gets put on hold for another 4 years. It was a lot of fun. It was, something that really kept us engaged and entertained for a couple weeks. But the likelihood of America winning the whole thing, relatively low. I tried to go into it with go into each matchup with a lot of just kind of blind confidence, like, hey, maybe anything can happen. Maybe they'll pull this off. And last night, it became evident very quickly with how aggressive Belgium was being, and America, the word being tossed around a lot is playing scared. They were, and you could kind of see that throughout the game last night. It was clear that last night that magic was going to come to an end. I'll get some of your thoughts on the text line coming up later on in the show, because this did feel different than some of the other runs they've had in the World Cup, and I do want to get into why that is. But unfortunately, it does come to an end last night. Belgium moves on to the round of 16 now, and only less than 2 weeks left in the World Cup. So are you still watching? You tuned out now because America's out? Let me know, 803-404-6100. But it was fun while it lasted, and that's all I can say, at least in terms of what that meant for the U.S. men's national team, and definitely the most I've gotten into the World Cup probably in my lifetime. So it was enjoyable while I was there, but again, unfortunately, that run does come to an end last night for the U.S. men's national team. And maybe part of why this was so enjoyable is because it was something that's helped bridge the gap, or at least partly bridge the gap, between the end of spring sports and the start of fall sports, namely college football, where we're 60 days away from South Carolina starting their season and 53 days away from week number 0. By the way, I think yesterday was officially 1 month until NFL preseason games start. So we're inching closer to football in general happening, and having the World Cup kind of serve as that thing to occupy our time a little bit has been nice. But now I think for a lot of us, the focus reshifts completely back to football. And one of the things I look forward to every offseason is the Phil Steele College Preview magazine. Officially hit shelves, I think only at Barnes & Noble right now. Just the other day, the last couple of years, I have gone with the digital copy. Now, last year, I don't know what happened, but the digital copy is a lot harder to navigate on the Phil Steele website. So I said to myself, you know what? Physical media is kind of a dying breed anyway. I just learned the other day that PlayStation's going to stop selling physical copies of games, I think, starting early next year. So I'm going to try and enjoy that while it's still here. So I told myself yesterday, you know what? I'm going to go and buy the actual magazine. I have a tangible copy in my hand to use and reference whenever I need, so I don't have to navigate the website and all that kind of stuff. So I went to Barnes & Noble yesterday over on Carnage Ferry, and I should have known with something that was that new, it would have had like its own display, because I lapped that store probably 3 or 4 times, went over to the sports magazines and looked high and low for everything, couldn't find it. Lo and behold, it was on a table right by the cash register, and I could have been in and out in about 2 minutes. Instead, I ended up spending about 10 in there, but that's on me. I do have my physical copy, excited, been thumbing through it a little bit already last night, as again, Phil Steele does a phenomenal job. Dedicates basically his entire year to putting these previews together, and again, it's the ultimate source for any college football fan, especially those like us that work in media, in terms of getting the best lowdown on teams, especially with how much changes in the offseason. Going into a new year. He also does his media rounds once the book is officially out, and the first radio interview he's done of this media cycle was with none other than Elijah and Preston yesterday morning on the early game, and they asked him a number of questions, the first of which being, what should fans be optimistic about with this 2026 South Carolina team? And here's what Phil Steele had to say.
Yeah, and this year I am bullish on South Carolina. I put them on my most improved list. 2 years ago, South Carolina was coming off a 5-7 season. I put them on my most improved list. They got to 9-4. Now, last year, South Carolina fans weren't too happy with me, I should say. I picked them low. They were considered a national title playoff contender, and I had them 10th in the SEC. But a lot of that was due to the defense. And, I thought they lost too much from the defensive front seven last year. And even with that, you go back to the Alabama game. They led that thing 22-14, 10 minutes to go. They had a shot to win that. A&M up 30-3 at the half. Sorry to open up some wounds there, guys. But I think they're going to be improved, especially at that linebacker position. That's probably one of the more experienced units, probably the strength of the team this year. And then offensively, you got Lenore Sellers back. Remember, he got injured against Vanderbilt. Took a few games to get back. I think he's going to have the type of year more towards what he was playing at the end of 2024. And then let's look at the offensive line as well. Back in 24, they didn't have any injuries on the offensive line. They had one start missed all year. Last year, the injuries cropped up. They fired their OL coach mid-year. They dropped to 111 yards per game rush, allowed 43 sacks. I think if you look at the offensive line this year, they added 7 offensive linemen that were full-time starters. And really, when you add transfers, you want to add guys with experience. So I'm looking for a stock market bounce from that offensive line, a more improved run game, Lenore Sellers back to form, and a defense which was decent last year, but I think they're going to be better this year, especially at the linebacker core, the strength of the team. So add it all up, I'm much more bullish on South Carolina this year than I was last year.
Well, here's hoping he's right on that, and a lot of the things that he pointed out, there are obviously things that we've talked about so much this offseason, and we'll continue to do for the next 60-ish days until the season officially begins. Obviously, starting with Lenore Sellers and the hope and optimism that he's going to bounce back to what we saw out of him, a couple years ago when he was playing his best football in those last 6 games of the 2024 season. Again, when you bring in Kendall Briles, the optimism is that he's going to be able to re-unlock, if not make a better version of Lenore Sellers, to help lead this team to hopefully even better heights than what you saw 2 seasons ago. And again, it's wait and see. Obviously, we're not going to know until we get into the season. But the linebacker thing is something interesting there that Phil Steele points out that we've not spent a ton of time on so far this offseason, and I think it is maybe one of the more underrated aspects of what's coming back for South Carolina when you have your entire main linebacking core coming back in Sean Murphy, J.R. Johnson, and Justin Okoronkwo. Again, that was a unit we had a lot of questions about going into last year because your linebacking core that was so good, the season before was completely gone. And you're replacing this with a couple guys out of the transfer portal and a guy in J.R. Johnson that hadn't gotten a ton of run in his first year at South Carolina, back in 2024, because those other guys, Debo Williams, Demetrius Knight, and Bam Martin Scott, were taking pretty much all those snaps. But you have that experience of those guys coming back, and I think a lot of us look at a guy in J.R. Johnson as a potential maybe breakout player for this team this year because of what his upside potential is, and we saw flashes of that at times a year ago with kind of being that guy that could be all over the field and make plays just about anywhere, and having that entire room coming back, at least the mainline starters and those three guys coming back is really, really huge, and hopefully that's something that contributes to South Carolina having a ton of success this year. And of course, he mentioned the offensive line, which again has been just a consistent problem with South Carolina in the Beamer era, and perhaps none worse than it was a season ago. But of course, we know the changes that have been made this offseason with Randy Clements. He mentioned how much experience that they brought in terms of guys that had started other places coming in via the transfer portal in this rebuild offensive line room. And I'll go back to an article that came out a couple weeks ago on the Big Spur, this by Harrison Lutheran, about 2 weeks ago now, talking about the experience of the offensive line on what we project to be the starters. And again, we don't have an official depth chart right now, and I know Beamer gets funny when people put these kind of projections out, but what our knowledge that we have right now, we believe from left to right, the offensive line will be Jakarius Peak, Hank Purvis, Carter Miller, Kojo Poku, and Shed Surratt. Now, that can change, but again, a lot of the prevailing thought is that that's what your starting five is going to be. And he tallied that, again, Harrison with the Big Spur, tallied that is 14 years of college experience, 143 games played, and 102 starts. That's phenomenal, right? Like, those are the kind of things you want to hear with your offensive line. Now, you don't have the continuity of those guys playing together, and Shed Surratt, as we anticipate, is the only one that started previously on South Carolina's offensive line before. So there can be some bumps in the road. There can be an up-to-speed process, especially if we're in a situation like with Jakarius Peak in terms of his injury, where maybe they decide not to play him in those first two games, because, again, you shouldn't need Jakarius Peak to beat Kent State and Towson, right? You should be able to be fine with whoever you're going to plug in at that left tackle spot. It's more important to make sure that he's healthy and ready to go for, Mississippi State and all the SEC games you have starting after that. So you could be dealing with not having your true starting five playing together until a couple weeks in the season. So that is something that's going to be a bit of a process in terms of getting all these guys on the same page in terms of playing in actual game type of scenarios. But I love the fact that you have so much experience across this line. Shed Surratt kind of being the one outlier, considering the fact that, he's going into only his true sophomore year in college, but we saw a lot of good things out of him at times last year, versatile, being able to move around the offensive line. So it does create a lot of reason for optimism. And again, as we talk about so many times, if you fix the offensive line, and my standard for them is if you can cut like the sacks in half, right? Like Carolina's consistently been at the bottom of the SEC in the Beamer era in terms of total sacks allowed, and last year I believe it was 43 total ones that they surrendered. 43, which was second worst in the SEC, only behind Mississippi State. If you tell me that they cut those sacks in half and they're only giving up 21, 22-ish, I'll take that, right? That's still about middle of the road in the SEC, but it's way better than what it has been. If they had 22, they'd actually be fifth best in the SEC last year. Tennessee had 22 allowed. So if you can be in that range, that's phenomenal. And here's hoping that ends up being the case, because if your offensive line can block for Lenore Sellers, can block for your run game, and keep everybody upright, then I think this offense can flow really, really well. And as Phil still pointed out, plenty of reasons to be optimistic about that when it comes to South Carolina and this upcoming season, which again is now 60 days away until we start it against Kent State. What does the number 60 mean as we continue to count down to the start of the season? I'll tell you about that coming up next. And also don't forget, Chapel Fowler of the State Newspaper going to join me coming up at 9:30 to give his insight into the offseason for the team in the Upstate. As again, Carolina will, of course, wrap up the regular season with them as we finish off our opponent previews coming up in at 9:30. As the Extra Point does roll along, Tyler Head along with you, flying solo on your Tuesday here on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. I see on the text line a lot of you were giving Elijah and Preston your top movie lists of all time. We were talking about that a little bit in the break, and I'm racking my brain. That'd be a tough list to come up with, like my top 10 movies of all time, because there's so many, right? And as they asked me what my number one was, and I contend that I think Shawshank Redemption is the greatest movie ever made, but like it's not the movie I've watched the most in my life. So would I put it number one? Would it have to be like lower in the list? I don't know. But obviously they had a lot of fun with that earlier on the show, and I'd have to really sit down and think of what my top 10 movie list would be, because there's so many great options out there. But regardless, hey, watching movies is a great way to help you get closer to football season by being able to waste a couple hours doing that and helping the days go by a little bit faster, as we are 60 days away from South Carolina kicking off against Kent State on September 5th. Again, going to be blazing hot at 12:45. So as I've been saying, go ahead and hydrate and get your sunscreen lathered on now to prepare for what that day is going to be like. And the number 60 is interesting. And I typically search through, statistics, the roster, seeing anything, the number 60 or whatever the corresponding number of countdown to kickoff, if it stands out to me. And yesterday, I thought, you know what? 60 is for 60 minutes, because that's how long a football game is. 60 minutes divided up into 4 15-minute quarters. And that's something that South Carolina didn't play a full game of very often last year. And this year they must find a way to consistently put together 60 minutes of football if they're going to survive this tough, especially the back half of the season, this tough schedule that they have lying ahead of them. Last year, in terms of scoring by quarter for South Carolina, it's glaringly obvious the difference between the first half and the second half. Last year in the first quarter, South Carolina averaged 6.25 points per first quarter. Second quarter, a significant jump, about 9 points per game in the second quarter. Immediate dip into the third quarter, averaging about 4.5 points, and then the fourth quarter, even worse, at just under 3 points at 2.91. So a very clear issue came for South Carolina when it came to scoring points and finishing off games in the second quarter, playing those final 30 minutes. As we saw against Texas A&M, as you heard Phil Steele reference a moment ago in the clip that I played, phenomenal first 30 minutes. Hey, you scored 30 points. You're up by 27 on, I think, at the time, the number 3 team in the country. Incredible. If you can find a way to score anything at all in the final 30 minutes of that game, South Carolina has a really, really good shot to win. They would proceed to score no points and blow that 27-point lead and, of course, lose 31-30. And, again, that was the real boiling point and the most obvious and glaring example of Carolina's inability to finish games last year. And there's a lot of things that go into that. Part of it is conditioning, right? Like, you have to be physically conditioned to play football for the 60 minutes that take place over the course of roughly 3.5 hours. And it seemed like last year they weren't as conditioned as maybe they've been in years past. So you got to go back to the drawing board, reassess what you're doing in terms of strength and conditioning and all that kind of stuff. Luke Day and his staff, I'm sure, were quick on that in the offseason, as it was a very glaring issue a season ago. But something else, and I tried desperately to find the clip yesterday. I couldn't remember what press conference it was from. But Beamer talked about getting back to basics, especially with all these guys coming in from the transfer portal and coming in as freshmen, where maybe they took that for granted a year ago, right? Because you kind of assume when somebody's, 18, 19, 20 years old, has been playing football for, 10, 12 years of their life, especially guys that have been playing college football for multiple years, that everybody knows up to a certain point of everything, right? Well, maybe that's not the case. As we saw last year, some examples of, not to pick on Boaz Stanley, but he had so many of those, like, illegal snaps, snap infractions, false starts, those kind of things. Like, hey, man, is there something this guy doesn't know that just wasn't being taught in the offseason or something along those lines. And again, I wasn't able to go back and find the clip, but I do remember Beamer talking about like, hey, we're going to make sure everybody's on the same page. We're going to make sure everybody understands even the basic fundamentals of things to make sure we're leaving no stone unturned. Because when you have a season as bad as last year's was, that's kind of the route you have to take. Like, hey, we need to make sure we are not missing a single detail with any of these guys, not just assuming, all right, this guy's been playing college football for 2 to 3 years. He's going to know X, Y, and Z. Like, no, you got to make sure he knows it, because especially you get in these late game scenarios, those kind of things do ultimately end up cropping up. Last year as well, because again, they were in so many of these games late. You were still in the A&M game. You were in the Missouri game. You were in the Alabama game. You were in the Clemson game. Nobody stepped up and made those big plays, right? Let's think back to 2024 and some of the key moments in especially that last 6 games of the regular season. Rocket Sanders making his incredible run for a touchdown, to win against Missouri in the final minute. What Sellers did with 3rd and 16 against Clemson, followed by Demetrius Knight getting the key interception as Clemson's driving down the field to attempt to tie or win the game there in the last couple of minutes. Like those, you had key guys stepping up at key moments and making plays, and you had basically none of that a season ago. So who are going to be those guys this year? Obviously, we look at Sellers as being one of them. Is a Matthew Fuller going to be that in the in the backfield? Is a Nick Harbor or a Nitro Tuggle going to be able to do that in the receiving core? Is it going to be one of your linebackers that we talked about a moment ago, Vakari Swain, whoever, on the defensive side of the football, making those plays? Dylan Stewart, forcing a fumble late or getting a key sack. Like, are those guys going to step up in key moments when you're playing in those tight games? Because that ultimately does matter as well. And then you can't have coaching blunders either, right? And not all of this is on Shane Beamer, but he is still the head coach. So all of this does fall under the umbrella of his head coach, of him being the head coach and CEO of the team. Last year, he had the things with, Matthew Fuller not getting touches after ripping off the 72-yard touchdown against LSU. The past couple of years, the obvious fake punts that blow up in your face against Ole Miss 2 years ago, Oklahoma last year, mismanaging timeouts against Texas A&M. And again, not all of that is specifically on Beamer. Some of that is personnel and, running backs coach, or the plays that Shula's calling, or Jody Camillus and his decision-making as the special teams coordinator the past couple of years. But still, as the head coach, that ultimately does end up falling in your lap to some degree, and you can't have those kind of blunders, right? Especially this deep into a head coaching tenure, because those kind of things will ultimately cost you games. And look, I know this team's not going to be perfect at everything. There are going to be situations that they mess up or get wrong and mismanage and that kind of stuff, but limiting those things as much as you can goes into playing a full 60 minutes of football, which again, they very rarely did a season ago, despite how many opportunities you had against really good teams to beat them. Alabama, A&M, again, just to name a few, in terms of games that you had opportunities to close out, and you weren't able to do that. So of the many things that I put on my wish list and hope list for South Carolina this upcoming season, being able to play full 60 minutes of football, so we're not talking about, well, they blew it again. Well, they went another 2 or 3 weeks without scoring in the fourth quarter, and now they're on a 4 or 5 game losing streak. I don't want to talk about those things again. I want to talk about a team that plays a full 60 minutes, that is the best version of itself, that has playmakers step up in key moments at the very end of the game, that doesn't shoot itself in the foot over and over again with coaching blunders or penalties or those kind of things, and ultimately has a lot better results on the field this upcoming year. It's a wait-and-see process. Again, they can talk about things they've done to try and improve that in the offseason, and as they go through, preseason camp, we need to see it in action on the field to believe that things have ultimately changed. And again, fingers crossed, and here's hoping that it ultimately does. So 60 minutes of football that Carolina needs to be playing every single game this year for our 60 days until a kickoff against Kent State coming up on September 5th. That's the start of the season. Clemson is the end of the season, and we'll wrap up our opponent previews coming up next as Chapel Fowler of the State newspaper joins me on the other side to tell us everything about what's been going on in the upstate this offseason. It is the Extra Point. It's our head along with you here on your Tuesday on The Game. All right, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. It's Tyler Head along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Slowly making our way to the start of the college football season. Again, 60 days away from kicking off the season. And as we've been doing the past couple weeks, previewing all of South Carolina's opponents. And we've, at long last, reached the final one. Of course, the Saturday after Thanksgiving, they will take on Clemson, hopefully in a better position. They took them on a year ago where they weren't really playing for anything in that game as Carolina had already been eliminated from bowl contention. Here to join me on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines to tell us what's been going on in the upstate from the state newspaper is our guy, Chappell Fowler. Chappell, appreciate the time as always. How are you doing and how's the summer going?
Hey, good to be on with you, Tyler. I'm good. We got ACC kickoff next week in Charlotte. Just kind of think about how close everything is to getting underway, and Clemson's on-campus media day a few days before that, and then, it's fall camp before we know it. So I'm excited for all that and excited to be on talking with you. It's always good to talk a bit of football so then I can kind of forget about what happened last night with the other football in Seattle with the men's national team butt kicking they took against Belgium.
Yeah, that's been something that's been fun to kind of keep us occupied the past couple of weeks, but now it's like, all right, that's over with, and there's still more World Cup going on, but less interest now that the U.S. is out. But yeah, once we get to ACC kickoff, SEC Media Days coming up in a couple of weeks, we're in high gear and off and running for the start of the season at that point. So almost there, man, almost there.
I'm fired up. Yeah, that's anything to not think about Tim Riemann, that goalkeeper, and what they did. Again, I was so excited. I got really into it. I'm going to keep watching, but man, that was a gut punch for a lot of people, myself included.
Yeah, tough one to swallow, no doubt. As we kind of look at Clemson now, we go back to the beginning of the year, and you had the Luke Farrelly situation with Ole Miss, which, by the way, nothing has really come of that since then. But other than that, it's been a relatively quiet offseason for the team in the upstate. Is that by design? Are there things that maybe we've been overlooking? What has been going on in the months since that occurred?
I think it's probably a little by design, but a lot of it is just, their national profile right now is so much lower than it was last year. They were, they're in the middle of a love fest all of last offseason, and rightfully so. I mean, amazing retention, really strong record, good showing against Texas in the CFP. Klubnik is wheeling and dealing. You bring back basically everybody you have with eligibility. Your top five, you have all these expectations, you're embracing them. And then you flop so early like you did last year, and, they fought back. It's not like they missed a bowl or anything, but it was still just so far off the expectations. So then if you do that and then you lose a bunch of guys to the NFL, you bring in a bunch of unproven transfers, people aren't going to be as hot on you, like for good reason. Next week at ACC kickoff, Clemson, oh my gosh, has been picked to either win or finish like second in the ACC, I swear. I don't know, 11 of the last 12 years, or maybe the last 12 years straight or something like that. That is not going to be the case next week. I'm really interested to see where they end up in that media poll, which is, again, just one indication or measure of stuff. But, they're going to be unranked in the preseason top 25, very obviously. They are a big underdog to LSU, I think 11 points in this week one game. So there's all sorts of, momentum going against them. And I think that's deserved because of what they put on the field last year. But at the same time, you could look at that as a positive, okay, let's work in silence and grind and show everybody that we're still the Clemson we used to be. So it could go either way, but I think it's been quiet, partially by design because they just want to get to work and fix what went wrong last year. But a lot of it, too, is just people are paying less attention to them because of how last season went.
And, of course, last season being the step back that it was, we've seen a lot more sourness towards Dabo Swinney. And, again, he went on such a long run of success, including the national championships. At some point, you are going to hit some bumps in the road. But the question is, okay, is this a one-year blip on the radar, or is this what Clemson's going to be going forward? Where is the fan base with Dabo at this point in time?
I think it would be a lot tenser of an environment right now if he didn't at least, acknowledge the mistakes, take a lot of the blame himself, and do some things to fix it. I think a lot of fans would have liked to see Clemson get a portal quarterback. Me personally, as someone covering them and having watched Christopher Vezina in spot moments over these last few years, I think that could have been helpful, but at the same time, you only have this amount of money to go to the portal and get people. So Dabo made some changes on his staff that he brought in a record number of transfers. I think it's going to end up being 10, 11 if you count a JUCO guy who I kind of count. They've done stuff to, in his mind, fix the issues. And then again, you can poke holes in, okay, you didn't get a quarterback, and then obviously the offensive coordinator hires a retread hire in Chad Morris. It's not like it's some new hot shot, but at the same time, the new hot shot Garrett Riley in this last 3 years didn't really work out. So Dabo's very much betting on himself, like he always has, but he is also making some changes. So I think the fact that, they're going into the portal more, they've brought in a few new coaches. They have a new strength coach, Joey Batson retired, who was their longtime guy, and they have a new guy, Dennis Love, who seems to really be bringing some extra energy and juice. So there are a lot of tangible changes, whether it's on the staff, on the roster from last year. Maybe not the most grand, sweeping, vast changes that people wanted after a 7-6, 4-4 ACC year. But I think the fact that he's at least done that has people not optimistic, but, willing to give it another shot, because it's not someone standing at the top of this program and saying, okay, we're not going to change anything. He's definitely adapting, maybe not as much as some people would like, but he's done a good amount this offseason. There's more churn and turnover across the program than there has been in a long time.
Chapel Fowler, the state newspaper, joining me in the AAA Heating and Air phone lines. Let's get into that quarterback battle. As you mentioned, didn't go out there and get anybody in the transfer portal. Vizina returns as the most experienced guy, started last year in place of Cade Klubnik with the injury in the SMU game. Chris Denson comes in comes back as a redshirt freshman. A highly touted guy, and Tate Reynolds also comes in as a freshman. From what I've been reading, it seems obviously that Vizina's kind of getting the nod right now, but where does that all stand? And is this something that's going to persist through preseason camp coming up here in the next month?
I think it will. It is a quarterback battle for sure. I do think my gut is that Vizina is going to be starting that week 1 game no matter what, unless he blows out his knee in fall camp or something. I just think it's a really tough spot to bring in like a true freshman and have their first game be in Death Valley and Lane Kiffin's debut. Vizina's game against SMU wasn't perfect. It also wasn't terrible. I mean, he threw for over 300 yards. He had 2 touchdowns. A lot of that was when they were down like 2 possessions in the second half. But it's a highly recruited kid who's stuck around. And obviously, the staff believes in him. So I understand that. But Tate Reynolds, they're super, super high on. Those are your top 2 guys, like by a mile. Like Chris Denson may move to another position this year. That's kind of what Dabo told us at the end of spring practice. Like, it's the top 2 are Vizina and Reynolds, and I think Dabo's words after the spring game were, and it's not even close from there. So those are your top 2 guys, 100%. There's a lot of thought and optimism that, Reynolds at some point late this year could push Vizina. Maybe he starts a few games. I don't know. I think back to Klubnik 4 years ago, people were so excited about him. But there's just so much you have to learn, to be a college quarterback. You got to put on weight, all the plays, just such a higher level. I don't know if Klubnik was better than DJU at halfway through the season, but he didn't really start a game and really take over for him until that ACC title game. So they're very much in the mindset of let's slow play our quarterback development, and I think they're going to lean on Vizina. I do think Reynolds is going to push him a lot in fall camp. That'll probably make both of them better, and maybe at some point late this season, whether it's because of performance or just injury, Reynolds comes in and flashes. But I think it's going to be Vizina to start. And for a long time, I think he's going to have a long leash. He's waited, this is his 4th year on campus, and this can be his first time, starting a full season. So I think he's going to have a long leash to kind of, get into that and settle in. And they obviously see a lot in him to keep him around.
About 2 more minutes here. You mentioned them being more aggressive in the transfer portal this offseason, majority of that being on the defense. Who are the names we need to know that should play key roles coming out of the portal for them?
Yeah, anytime you watched the Clemson game last year, if you tuned in, I'm sure you saw their secondary just totally out of position and giving up massive chunk plays in the worst possible moments. So they've signed 2 group of 5 safeties that I think will start immediately and be a pretty impactful duo out there in the backfield. Corey Myrick from Southern Miss, and then Jerome Carter from Old Dominion, 2 guys who had really good stats last year, obviously at a non-power conference level. But they're super high on those 2. They're veteran guys. I think Carter had like 5 or 6 interceptions last year. Those are 2 just at a position they really, really needed depth at. On top of the returning guys not being incredibly talented, Khalil Barnes transferred and Ricardo Jones transferred. So they really needed immediate help right there. I think Marcus Strong, a defensive tackle who played at Oklahoma last year, had a big safety against South Carolina, is another guy who can make a difference. And then London Merritt from Colorado is a big freaky, like 6'5" edge rusher. And they've got a few other guys kind of selectively. Obviously no Forelli because of all of that saga. And that's a really big loss. But I think at safety specifically, and then a few along the defensive line. They'll have some, maybe not stars, but some impactful guys.
Well, we'll see if both of these teams are in better shape going into that last game of the regular season they were this past year, because that always makes that rivalry game a lot more fun. Man, enjoy the rest of the summer. Take care, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you plenty between now and then.
All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate you having me.
Yep, Chapel Fowler there of the State Newspaper with the preview of Clemson, and that does it for our opponent previews. We've gone through all 12 opponents for South Carolina. Again, 60 days until the season starts against Kent State, and again, fingers crossed that we're not talking about a team with only 4 wins going into the final game of the regular season like they were last year. We'll come back, wrap up hour number 1, get back into what happened with the U.S. men's national team last night and why this run felt more special and why everybody was more excited up until what happened last night against Belgium. That's coming up next. Wrap up hour number 1 of the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you on your Tuesday here in the game.
Walter is the one who's...
Richards beaten out of the air. Freeze has got to get there and deal with it. He takes it down off the chest to Ketelar, knocks it away. Tim Ream can't block it. And unless video review says this is a foul from behind on Ream, it is a disaster.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Well, I typically like to play highlights coming into segments like this, but there weren't a whole lot of highlights for the U.S. men's national team last night, and perhaps that was the biggest low light of not only the game last night between the U.S. and Belgium, but one of the low lights of the entire World Cup so far for the U.S. as they allowed the third goal there to Belgium. Goalkeeper Freeze was out of the box there and wasn't able to properly defend the goal. That made it a 3-1 game in the 57th minute of the game there. And at that point, I think most of us kind of knew it was over. Belgium would get a final fourth goal later, I believe in the 85th minute, if I remember correctly, but it was pretty much all done from there at that point anyway. And unfortunately, the U.S. goes out with the whimper. The crowd was hot, and they were up there in Seattle. We obviously know how passionate the fans are up there for the Seahawks and everything like that. And unfortunately, this run in the World Cup does ultimately come to an end for America once again in the round of 16. Now I know they've changed the expansion of the tournament, so you actually win a knockout round game this time around, so it does make it feel a little bit different, but this continues to be where the road typically ends for the U.S. men's national team, as in their last 4 appearances in the World Cup. This is, I believe, where it has ended each and every time, but up until this point, it was pretty fun, right? Like, this run was enjoyable. And again, I'm not a soccer expert by any means. I don't have a Premier League team that I follow. I got into Atlanta United when they burst onto the scene, were really successful, early on, a couple years, or, in 2017, 2018 in Atlanta, but it's not something that I am ingrained in as much each and every day, like football or baseball or basketball and those kind of things. But man, this has been really enjoyable. And maybe it had to do with the fact that they looked so good in the group stage outside of the loss to Turkey, but they had already locked up the number 1 spot in their group at that point in time, that there was just this swelling in belief that maybe this year could have been different. And look, we all get national pride and, patriotism flowing through our veins whenever our national sports are playing, right? And obviously we had the best of that moment earlier on this year with the U.S. men's hockey team, winning the gold medal. We obviously all get invested in the curling and the, gymnastics of the Olympics and things like that, sports that typically we don't pay as much attention to, but because they're representing our country on the global stage, we obviously, hitch our wagons to that and hope for the best there. And I don't know, there was something about the way this team played in those first couple of games, and even up into, the Bosnia Herzegovina game the other day. There was just an energy about them that I think people really resonated with. Like, hey, maybe this isn't the most talented team, but they're fun to watch. They play with a lot of energy, and they're not afraid, right? And again, I'm not a soccer expert by any means, but the common phrase that's been thrown around a lot after last night's game was the U.S. was playing scared, playing on their heels a little bit. Belgium was consistently attacking, and the U.S. just wasn't really doing that. So it's not a great way to see them go out by losing the game the way that they did. And again, Belgium just ends up being a better team, but I think a lot of people would have liked to have seen more energy, right? More aggressiveness from the U.S., even though they may have been outmatched in terms of the talent necessarily. Maybe could have done a little bit better in terms of bringing the fight, even though maybe they were outmatched a little bit. So comes to an end the run for the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup. Still got about 2 more weeks until we crown a World Cup champion. I believe the final is on July 19th. That's the night before media days. So a lot of things can be going on that week. That's for sure. And I will still watch. I'll still pay attention because there's still a lot of really compelling stories, really good teams. What England did the other day, going down Aztec and beating Mexico, I thought was one of the coolest moments of the entire tournament in terms of what kind of an upset that was. So I'll continue to keep my eye on it, but just doesn't quite have the same flavor and feel when you don't have, your country, the team that you're rooting for, in it still standing. But it's been a lot of fun so far, and hopefully we can get treated to some really good games as this thing wraps up. And it's just been really cool to have it in the United States, right? And I know it's also been in Mexico and Canada and stuff like that, but primarily the games taking place in the U.S. and, seeing all these people of different cultures coming from around the world and, sharing that with the Norwegian fans, and they're rowing the boat and all that kind of stuff. It's been really cool to see, and it's been a fun event so far. And again, unfortunately, the road does come to an end for the U.S. men's national team with that 4-1 loss to Belgium last night. But now we wait until, 2030 to try this again. And here's hoping that they can come out even better that time around and maybe, just maybe, be able to replicate, if not beat, what they did back in 2002, getting all the way to the quarterfinals, but not in the cards this year, unfortunately. But for the most part, outside of last night's game, very fun team to watch, and one that I think captured the hearts of America in a lot of ways, even though it did ultimately come to an end. So that's it for the U.S. men's national team in the World Cup, and we'll see who claims the trophy coming up here in a couple weeks. We'll get into the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing coming up next. More on what Phil Steele had to say about other teams in the SEC, and also Kobe Saki-Pross sits down with Chris Clark in the 10 o'clock hour as well. All that coming up next on your Tuesday on the Game.
All right, everyone, as we close out the first hour here, let me tell you guys about AAA Heating and Air, where home comfort is their top priority. Give a call today at 803-677-1500 to schedule a seasonal maintenance appointment. Let AAA Heating and Air's qualified technicians put your mind at ease with a thorough inspection and cleaning of your heating and cooling system. Join their popular AAA Comfort Club to take advantage of special extras like flexible visits, added discounts, and priority scheduling. AAA Heating and Air also offers indoor air quality products that work with your HVAC system to improve your home's air quality. Cleaning the air eliminates common household odors, removes allergens and pollutants, and can even improve sleep and reduce the spread of some viruses. So go to callAAAtoday.com for more info. Again, that is callAAAtoday.com for more info. Tell them Jack from 107.5 The Game sent you on over.
All right, welcome back in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing. It's our head along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. You'll hear Chris Clark's conversation with Kobe Saki-Prop coming up here in about 10 or so minutes as he sat down with the second-year edge rusher and got his thoughts on his year at South Carolina. He did get hurt prior to last season, if that's a name that maybe you've forgotten about, and was not available to play last year. So he is somebody that's still in that edge rushing room, that edge room, a room that we're all curious to see who kind of emerges as the opposite guy of Dylan Stewart. And you'll get him more insight into Kobe Saki-Prop from Chris Clark coming up here in about 10 or so minutes. But I started off the show this morning talking about Phil Steele. The Phil Steele magazine is officially out. For those that want to go out there and buy it. I got it at Barnes & Noble yesterday. You can also buy it online, though I would recommend getting the physical copy because managing the digital copy wasn't very fun for me last year, so I enjoy having the physical media in my hands that I can thumb through and read through, whenever I want to. Have it in studio here with me, and again, get you excited and hyped up for the season like so many other things, as, again, it gives great insight into what every team might end up being and helps you keep up with everything that changed in the offseason, as, again, so much changes from year to year with all these teams. Phil still does a phenomenal job in terms of letting you know what to know going into the year. And yesterday he was on with Elijah and Preston on the early game doing his radio media rounds as we get set to start the season, as his magazine has been released. And they obviously talked a lot about South Carolina, but they talked as well about other teams in the SEC. And one of the questions that was posed to Phil Steele is what team, and this was kind of posed from a national standpoint, but the answer ended up being an SEC team. What team that's being like a preseason top 10 might end up being the ultimate disappointment or the biggest disappointment? Because typically you run into that almost every single year. There's always one team inside of the AP top 10 to start the season that has a bad year. Florida State was that a couple years ago, obviously, and doesn't come anywhere close into being what their preseason expectations are. And he went with the LSU Tigers as his team that might end up being that disappointment. And here's what he had to say.
The one that I'm probably looking at might be LSU, and I think LSU probably comes into the season possibly in the top 10, but they have a rugged schedule. They are practically a new team, and I did a new thing in the magazine this year. It's called the Homegrown Factor, which talks about teams that recruit freshmen, and then they stay through all the way through. Alabama, Georgia are two of the teams at the top of the SEC. This LSU team is almost completely rebuilt. They have very little coming back from last year. They've got two offensive linemen. They've got Whit Weeks coming back at linebacker and a couple of good cornerbacks in P.J. Woodland and Tamari Cooley. But I don't think they're going to be top 10 level. I think when you look at the schedule this year, they play at Ole Miss, where I've got them a dog. The Texas A&M game to me is a toss-up. The Clemson game could be a toss-up early. They have to play at Auburn. They host Alabama, and Alabama handled them last year again. They host Texas. That's going to be a rough one. Texas, I think, with Arch Manning is much improved at the end of the year. That Tennessee team that we talked about. So there's the potential for this LSU team to lose 4 or 5 games this year. I don't think they'll be a top 10 team coming in at the end of the year, but I do think they might be a top 10 team at the start of the year in the AP poll.
It wouldn't surprise me if LSU's 8th, 9th, 10th or something like that in the preseason AP poll, which all that's a projection, right? Especially now with how much changes year to year. Nobody knows anything. We're just kind of spitballing on what we think teams are going to end up being. But again, I wouldn't be shocked if most people voted LSU to be inside of that top 10. Now, typically, whenever you bring in a new coach, there's a grace period, right? Like year number one, it's not a mulligan for everybody because a lot of places do have a certain list of expectations. But for like most of the time, a coach in year one isn't expected to take a team to the college football playoff. But LSU, this is kind of a different situation, right? Like you have the stuff where you run Brian Kelly out of town. You have the whole saga with Lane Kiffin, and will he stay at Ole Miss? Will he go to LSU or Florida or whatever it may be? That dominated the headlines for the last couple weeks of the regular season. Obviously, all the offseason stuff. And Phil still mentioned the fact that this team is so portal heavy. I always use ourlads.com that has their depth chart breakdown, and they always put new transfers in gold on the depth chart. And, man, this entire thing is just full of gold, especially when you talk about the offense at just about every single position. So this entire team going to look brand new with around 30-plus transfers coming in for Lane Kiffin in year number one. But, like, especially considering the fact that Ole Miss, also a very portal-heavy team, was almost in the national championship a year ago after Lane Kiffin had walked away. He's getting paid all this money. He's got all these resources, went out and brought in one of the best transfer portal classes of anybody this past cycle. I think that fan base, at least at minimum, expects you to be in that playoff conversation by the time the season comes to an end. Phil Still is right, though. They've got a bear of a schedule. Again, we'll see what Clemson's going to be. That's at least a game you have at home to start the season, but you're at Ole Miss, which talk about the most insane atmospheres maybe we've ever seen in college football. That one's going to be red hot when they go in there. Then you take on A&M. You know, you go to Jordan-Hare. You have Alabama. You have Texas. You have Tennessee on the road late in the season. Like, it's not going to be a cakewalk by any means. And as talented as that roster is, it doesn't mean that all those guys are going to end up panning out and being the superstars that they expect them to be. So I'm interested to see, A, if LSU can live up to that hype, and B, if they're not able to, if they're not having the season that people or that fan base expects them to have, how they feel about Lane Kiffin, because that's an LSU team that we talk about so much. Prior to Brian Kelly, the past three coaches had won national championships, right? In Nick Saban, Les Miles, and then Ed Orgeron prior to Brian Kelly getting there. And Kelly had them in the SEC title game in year number one as well. So this is a program that's used to having success relatively quickly in terms of new coaches coming in. With all the pomp and circumstance of what brought Lane Kiffin to LSU, I think those expectations are going to be very high. Now, when you look at Lane Kiffin in the prior three stops, in his prior stops as a head coach, where he did stops as a head coach in Power 4, his average record is about 7-5. Right? In his first year at Tennessee, first year at Southern California, and first year at Ole Miss, it takes a little bit to get things off the ground. But when he gets in that second year, he's right around 10 wins, which he did both at Southern California and Ole Miss. Of course, he didn't give himself a second year when he was at Tennessee because he took the Trojans job. So historically speaking, Lane Kiffin does get out of the box a little bit slow, but year number two is where he does start to hit his stride a little bit, and obviously reeled off multiple great seasons at Ole Miss, culminating with the team that almost played for the national championship a year ago, even though he wasn't at the helm during that playoff run. So if I had to guess, I would say, yeah, this year for LSU could maybe be that 8-4-ish, maybe on the high end, like a 9-3, and then maybe they round into form a little bit more in year number two. I just wonder if that fan base is going to be patient enough for that, or if there's going to be people already calling for his head, if they're halfway into the season and sitting at 500 or something along those lines. Because, again, that's a fan base that has high standards, and when you go out there and shift the earth of the college football world the way they did this past offseason, that comes with some unrealistic expectations too. And, again, Lane Kiffin puts himself in these situations, and we'll see if they're obviously ultimately able to live up to that, and just how off they might be from what preseason expectations are. Again, as Phil Still said, probably going to be in the top 10 in the AP poll. Will they end up being there at the end of the year and being in the playoff? We'll obviously see. But that will continue to be a storyline throughout all the college football season. Because, again, of how polarizing Lane Kiffin has become, I think he's definitely become like the villain of college football right now. Again, with how he handled the Ole Miss thing and other things he's done in his past. We thought he was changed. We all watched the E60 or 30 for 30 or whatever that was about, him turning over a new leaf, and that'll ended up just being a pile of what when he ends up leaving for Ole Miss. I don't know. It's gonna be interesting. Again, both two teams and two fan bases in very different places for that Week 1 game with Ole Miss and Clemson. And if Clemson loses that game, obviously that fan base going to be sideways with Dabo and everything in terms of getting a season off to a bad start. And if LSU loses to a team they probably don't view as one that's not on their level roster-wise compared to what they have brought in from the transfer portal, Lane Kiffin wouldn't be getting off on the right foot. So that's going to be an interesting game to watch in week number 1 to see how things play out. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing. Chris Clark sits down with Kobe Saki Prab from Gamecock Football coming up next. It is the Again, Garnet Trust Hour on your Tuesday on the Game.
All right, welcome in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing here on the game. Chris Clark, and rolling along with another special guest from the Gamecock football program. It's Kobe Sechi-Pra. Kobe, what's going on, man? How are things going? Appreciate you taking time to join me.
Yeah, no problem, man. Everything's good. Everything's going pretty good over here. I'm excited to be on here. So,
yeah, thanks. Is this your first radio / podcast type of deal? Have you done any of this in the past?
this is my first radio, actually. I've done a couple podcasts, but besides that, this is my first radio. So,
yeah, well, it'll be fun, man. I'm looking forward to the conversation, and we definitely have a lot to dive into. But here's where I actually want to start. Like, let's just tell a lot of Gamecock fans listening to this, obviously home of the Gamecocks here on the game. So we're going to talk a lot about football, trust me, but just tell some of the fans just about you as a person. Tell us about growing up, tell us about Kobe away from the football field, right? Like that's what we want to learn today a little bit.
Yeah, most definitely. So, my name is Kobe Sechi-Pra. That's a shorter version for Corbina Sechi-Pra. And I'm originally from Ghana. I was born and raised down there, lived there for about 9 years. I moved to the U.S. in 2016 around December time. So I think getting about 10, 11 years this year. I've been here. I started playing football 6th grade. I moved to the U.S. with my mom and my sister. We've been here. My sister is 13. She's now going into her 8th grade year, actually. And so I started playing football my 6th grade year. And, I didn't really know anything about it because in Ghana, we don't have football. We have soccer football, but we don't have American football.
Right.
So I started playing football. I played running back at first, and all I knew was get the ball and run because I didn't really know the rules. And so that's what I was doing. So I get the ball, run, and I was pretty good. But my first team was not very good. That's the only problem. So I kind of was like the star a little bit, and I ended up transferring to my high school, Roswell High School, where I've been playing there since my 8th grade, all through my sophomore year, all through senior year, 12th grade, obviously. Started picking up offers after my sophomore year. I was ineligible my freshman year because of some little altercation with the high school I was going to, and just like me playing football for my home school. And so after my sophomore year, I picked up a couple offers, and then my junior year tore my ACL. Senior year came back, played 9 games, had a little bit of a injury, kind of, not really, but. And then I picked up South Carolina my junior year, actually, from Sterluke when he was here. Mm-hmm. Me off the field, I would say I'm a pretty kind guy. Like, I'm kind of quiet a little bit. I don't really talk much, but I would say I'm very outgoing. Like, I can be outgoing, I'm very helpful. If I see something, I see someone needing help or something like that, I'd go out of my way to go help them out. I think that I'm a very positive type of person. I would say that. I don't know how else to describe myself, honestly, but I mean, I guess that's kind of like the basics of it, so, yeah.
So I got to ask you this, you're talking about Ghana, and actually it's funny, man, one of my favorite class, so I went to South Carolina for college.
Yes.
My favorite class was Dr. Ed Carr, who's moved on. He's not a professor anymore at South Carolina, but there was a class called Geography of Sub-Saharan Africa.
Oh,
and
wow, okay.
He taught a lot about Ghana. He actually had a house in Ghana.
Really?
So learned a lot about it. Really cool.
Yeah.
But what are some of the biggest, what was the transition like? I know it happened when you were younger, but like just moving from Ghana to the United States, like what were some of and moving to Georgia, obviously, like what were some of the differences, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I was just talking to one of my teammates about it too, actually. So coming from Ghana, you actually have to, it's like the U.S. to provide everything for you. Like you have so many opportunities down here. You need to be able to at least put in some sort of effort, and, opportunity is always going to be there for you no matter what. You obviously have to put in some work to get, where you want to be, So, I mean, like, for example, sports, going to college for free because of sports Or if you're really smart, you can go to college for free just because off of scholarships, or I mean, it could be anything really. Like that will get you to somewhere really good in life. In Ghana, it's kind of hard to get that. We don't have like in school, we don't have like the iPads or like the computers to help us, study and everything. We have to like write it down, learn from that. Um, College-wise, college is very different down there compared to here. Um, I'm trying to think. Like we go straight so we do classes at school differently down there. We do like lower division and upper division. So lower would be like first to third grade, and upper would be fourth to sixth grade. I left when I got to fourth grade down there. Came here. I think that living here it helps you obviously get to where you want to be sometime in the future. It helps you, because I was an engineering major at first because I've been doing that since obviously high school, and I came here and I was so set on it. And because of sports, it was able to also get me to a really good school with a really good engineering program, and just you have to study hard and get to where you want to be, And so I think the transition it was hard at first because I wasn't so used to everything up here. I had to figure out my way around, find my way around things down here, and figure out how things work here too. So I feel like that was the biggest thing for me when I got here.
So you mentioned Ghana and not having American football, but having soccer. You've been, do you still keep up with, do you watch soccer a lot? You've been watching the World Cup action, keeping up with all that?
I have been. Ghana just lost actually yesterday.
They did.
A day or two ago.
Yeah.
I was not very happy about it, but I mean, it is what it is. We'll get there. We'll get to. Like, give us another 4 years. We'll get to where it's supposed to be.
There you go.
So,
Yeah. Exactly. So you mentioned coming up playing football and playing running back at first, and then eventually to go into this, you switched positions and started playing, along the defensive line. What was that transition like as you learned the game? I imagine part of it was just, man, this Kobe kid is a big kid. Like, we probably should play him on the D line, right? Tell me about that a little bit.
So it was in my 8th grade year when I moved to Roswell. We had another running back come in I think he moved in from, I don't remember. He plays at Pittsburgh. He came in, and I think we had a little bit too many running backs, and obviously we started to realize that I'm getting a little too tall to be a running back in the first place. And so they were like, like, let's try you at tight end / DN, we'll see how you do there. And it was weird at first because I was used to like hitting people and not being the one to hit somebody, like running through people. And then just like the play calling wise and everything, it was very different. And so, I mean, for me, I think the transition it wasn't as bad as like you really think, honestly. Like I think it was a pretty smooth transition on my side. So.
Yeah, I'm going to actually read you some quotes. I talked to your high school head coach, and this was like 2 years ago, after you committed to South Carolina. But I talked to Chris Pruitt, your high school head coach, and he said, I don't even know what the ceiling would be for him. He's still learning football, why certain things are happening or why certain things are happening to him. I've seen nothing but growth from him since he's been here. Most of the plays you watch, he's doing that on instincts. I told coaches the ceiling is super high with him. God gave him a lot of ability and a lot of length and a lot of size. What do you think about that? Pretty good.
I think that's pretty accurate. When he mentioned just like out of instincts, because I never really did train it in high school, like at all. Like I was still trying to learn the game in the first place. So a lot of things are just from regular practice we did during practice, and I'll just apply it into the game, and it just happened to have caused me to get a lot of tackles and sacks and just like a bunch of all these good plays. So yeah, I think that's pretty accurate, honestly.
Yeah, sophomore season, you had 89 tackles, 9 sacks, 11 tackles for loss, a couple forced fumbles. And, you mentioned, Kobe, that you had the injury as a junior. And then, unfortunately, last season, first year here at South Carolina, you had to deal with another injury. What was that whole process like? I always like to ask guys about that. You never want injuries, right? But it's football. Everybody gets hurt. A lot of people get injured at some point. How did you, just deal with that process, whether it was in high school or here at South Carolina, to get back?
So when it happened the first time, I still kind of kept my hopes up, because I had to go to a camp literally 3 weeks later. So we just thought it was like a casual, meniscus tear. So just let it relax. Don't do anything to it. Let it heal, and you get through it. So then camp came. The same situation happened to where like it was my knee. I tore my ACL where it just popped again as it did during the high school as it was during a game actually, and that just didn't seem right to me. So I got it checked out and everything, and then I found out it was ACL, and I found out that I was gonna be out for a very long time. Now because of that, it caused me to pull myself away from the team only because being around them just made me sad because I couldn't play. You know, obviously every they any team really needs every support they can get, to help keep the players up, keep them going and everything. And I wasn't very good at that. I didn't really, because of the injury, and it just like it caused me to be so like I was just sad. I just wanted to play. I just wanted to be out there. I just wanted to be out there with everybody, play with one of my close friends because they was there last year playing, and it would have been just like a really good team that we had going on. We had all these plans and everything, and it's just like the injury just set me back a lot. So, I mean, to be honest, I just feel like what gets you through an injury is just like the people you're around and how, like, they still try to keep you involved in certain things. Like, for me, like in South Carolina, the only thing that kept me going is one, I knew, like, how it was in the past and how I was acting and how I put myself away from everybody. And so when I got here, the coaches, they try to keep me involved, like, learning the plays or being out on the field and watching your teammates practice, and you learn a little bit of something from it, keeping you around the team. They don't let you leave like till, practice is over because obviously they know how it is. And it's just like the mentality is just going to get all messed up and it's just all over the place and you're just going to be all, you know, and so, I mean, it was very challenging, but I mean, it's just the people you're around and just like the coaches and just how, you treat the situation in the first place is what gets you through it. So
Garnet Trust Hour here on the game. I'm Chris Clark, hanging out with Kobe Sechi-Pra from Gamecock Football. Back on the other side. All right, welcome back in. It's the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing here on the game. Chris Clark hanging out with Gamecock football edge rusher Kobe Sechi-Pry. Kobe, you were talking about, just a couple of injuries that you've had, one in high school, one here at Carolina. So first thing I want to ask is just how are you feeling now as now it's July, got through summer and everything. Preseason camp will be here before we know it. How are you feeling physically? How are you doing?
I feel the best I've ever felt, honestly. Like, I could go out there right now and hit somebody, like make a tackle or something, like make a play. I don't know. But I feel great though. I'm fully cleared, I'm full go. Right now we're all fighting for a position to, coming up to the first game, like, because we have a bunch of transfers and just like, new guys and a new coaching. So we have to obviously gain the coach's trust and, see how we are on field and everything. So I'm excited to show off. I didn't really get a chance to do that last year, but now there's this year, so I'm excited for that.
Tell me a little bit about, obviously one of the things you've dealt with is a coaching transition. You mentioned Sterling Lucas was the one that offered you when he was here at South Carolina when you were in high school, and now Coach Deion Barnes is leading your room. So what have you thought of Coach Barnes since he's been here, and what have you learned from him in the early going?
I think that he's a really, really good coach. I mean, coming from his past guys that he's coached up, like going back to like Abdul Carter, for an example, or like some of the guys that transferred out, the true freshman guys that he had a little bit. I've learned a lot from him. I learned he's taught us how he learned stuff, and when he played back then, he taught us like obviously repetition gets you, it gets stuck. It just becomes like an instinct now if you do a lot of, he tries to get you to do everything to a like make sure you get it down. He makes sure you understand what you're doing. He doesn't move past it until everybody understands it, and that's one thing that makes him a really good coach. When it comes to obviously plays, he makes sure he understands it too. Working a move, like you make sure you staying low, keeping your chest like down, like using your weight, just like everything that makes you an edge rusher. To do that and get you to that, like where you need to be, honestly. So I like that for him. I love him having him as a coach.
One of the things you talked about earlier was, that transition from when you moved to Georgia from Ghana, you're learning the game of football. Number one, you're switching positions. Number two, from playing running back to playing defensive line. But, I feel like for anybody, no matter how long they've played football, you get to college football and specifically the SEC, like there's a big difference. Like you guys played really good competition at your high school in Georgia, of course, but can you think back of like first moments at South Carolina, like experiencing something or seeing something in practice where you're like, wow, this is a little different, like as far as like the skill level, the athleticism?
Yeah. I can vividly remember this actually. So I just gone down here. I'm thinking like obviously everybody here came here because obviously they're either ranked in high school or they got some sort of offer from South Carolina. They have the same mindset that everybody's going in with, which was to be the best. I went in, I'm thinking, because I feel like I'm very well conditioned. So I went in, after orientation. When you get here, you have to do orientation before you can do anything else. So it was my first workout. We're doing sled pushes, right? And like it's light, like the grass is a little wet, so it's gonna make it move a little easier, So I'm pushing the sleds. 2 reps in, I'm getting tired, like I can't do it, and then my legs are starting to get everything, and I'm just like, this is like different because we never did this in high school, and I think we did I think it was for like warm up or something like that before we did the lifts. I was like, this is like the workout for high school. Like, this is unheard of. I've never done this ever in my life. I was so exhausted. I was tired. I don't think I got through anything throughout that whole day. And after that first week, when I got here, I was like, that's it. Like, I'm not going to be behind no more. I had to push myself. Obviously, it's all a mentality type of thing. So push yourself, try to be the best you want to be, try to keep up with everybody else, So that was something that whole week was just not it for me.
A lot of people say that, and a lot of people get here, and it's the intensity of the workouts, but also like Coach Day, he has some different things that he does, compared even to other programs. So that makes sense. Tell us about because you talked earlier about just you as a person, like off the field, and how you like to do things. And I'm curious for your thoughts on just how Shane Beamer runs his program, right? Because he talks a lot about culture and players being connected and players, being together, kind of that family feel. What have you observed in your time here on that front?
I think that everything that, him talking about culture and players, like treat everybody being a big family on the team, I think that he stood by it because, there's a couple programs that we have, I guess behind the scenes from everything else that help us bond pretty good. We have a couple of bonding activities we do. We have getting to know each other, like we have small groups where we get to know each other more often, ask questions on a deeper level, try to figure out where everybody's mind is at, He tries to, like even new guys that come in, they feel so welcome every time because we try to make them feel very welcome. And that's how I felt when I got here in the first place, I think everybody gets along pretty good. So his program, I think he's doing a very, very good job as to what he's doing. His plan that he has for his team is going very great. And honestly, I'm 100% here. I fully support his plan. So, yeah.
Kobe, last couple minutes here before I'll let you run and get back to the rest of your day. But, obviously you didn't get to play last year, as you said earlier, but you're full go now, which is great. And I know the season did not go how everybody wanted last year, right? But what is the mentality and the vibe that you've picked up in workouts or throughout spring ball and into summer workouts and all that? What's kind of the mentality and vibe you pick up around this football program?
I think that with us having the new transfers that came in, I think us having them plus the guys who are already here, I think that everybody, has a goal for the team and for themselves, which is obviously to make the championship or be the best position group in the nation, or, being top guy in the country, like, winning awards and all the different things. I think that everybody's mindset is, pretty good. I think that we all push ourselves to the limit during workouts or during practice or during, team meeting when we try to understand everything. We're going for extra time when we recover, make sure we get our bodies right. Obviously team bonding is one of the most important things too, making sure everybody's on the same page on the team, make sure nobody's, having all these little conflicts, but I think that, as of right now, I think everybody's right where they want to be. Coming up to the season, I think obviously everybody's still fighting for a position in the spot on the field, which honestly, that's how, it is. But I think as of right now, though, I think we're obviously right where we want to be. We all want a championship. That's what we're trying to get to at this point. We have a better season than last season. That's how I think about it. Have a better season than last season. That's what I think as of right now. So, yeah.
Good stuff. All right, Kobe. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking time to join us on the program, man. And I'm wishing you all the best. Hope you have a healthy number one and then productive season in year 2 here at Carolina, man.
100%. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that's Kobe Sechi-Pra here on the Garnet Trust Hour, presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing. Back on the other side.
All right, welcome back in. It is the Garnet Trust Hour presented by Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing. Tyler Head and Chris Clark wrapping up the hour here on your Tuesday on the game. You just heard Chris's conversation with Kobe Sechi-Pra. Have we always said Saki? I feel like we have.
Yeah, we were kind of floundering there. We're just kind of grasping at straws on that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it looks like.
It does, to be fair. And I heard you introduce him like, oh, I've been saying it wrong this entire time.
Well, before we talked, I made sure. I'm like,
Sure,
all right.
sure.
I'm like, all right. I know it's Kobe. I'm like, let me make a run at this.
Right.
And I went Kobe Saki, and he kind of smiled. Nah, not quite. You're close.
He probably gets that a lot.
I would imagine. Great kid. I really enjoyed the conversation with him.
Yeah, good conversation. I had no idea he was originally from Ghana.
Mm-hmm.
I also thinking about listening to the conversation. I've never been to Ghana, but I imagine it doesn't look much like Roswell, Georgia does. Two very different places.
I was going to ask you for your thoughts on Roswell.
Yeah. Roswell's it's a nice area. It's on the north side, around Marietta and things like that. So, a lot of big houses and things around that. Again, I've never been to Ghana, but I don't imagine there's a lot of similarities between the two.
Yeah, his journey's been really fascinating because, I remember, and I read him some of the quotes during the interview from talking to his high school coach, Chris Pruitt, right after Kobe had committed in the 2025 class. And, you very much got the sense of like, this is a guy that has a lot of potential and a lot of upside, but he's not, there's not a perfect prospect. There's nobody that comes out of high school that's a finished product. You don't get that. There's a few guys that maybe are close. You think about a Jadeveon Clowney or, like Jeremiah Smith would be a good example of you see those guys in high school and you're like, all right, this is instant impact. Like they can get better, but, they're already there almost. Sure. Kobe's a guy that just athletically, he has all the tools. Like, he's not, 6'6" or anything, but you look at his wingspan. He's got a massive wingspan. He's got athletic twitch. Like, he's got a lot of the traits that you like. I think for him, it's just he doesn't have as much football experience as a lot of guys. And then he's also now got 2 of the years out of his not many years in football where he's been hurt. He had a high school injury. First of all, his freshman year, he didn't play, just eligibility issue. Then junior season of high school, I believe it was, he's out. And then freshman year of college, he's out. And so fortunately, he feels good, says he feels better than he's ever felt. You hope for no further injury issues. But this is a guy that, like, he's got a lot of those athletic traits that you look for in a pass rusher. He's just kind of a mystery man in some ways. We haven't seen much of him. You watch his high school film, okay. Looks like a guy that could be a dude at some point. But, he's been behind some guys. He was injured. This is a year where, we're not talking about him a lot, right? Like, we're obviously talking about Dylan Stewart, talking about Caleb Herring, talking about Julian Walker. Anthony Addison as a redshirt freshman has, created some buzz. At what point does Kobe, make a little bit of a claim for some potential playing time? Maybe it's not this year, but this is the type of kid that if you can keep in your program, and he seems to be really enjoying his experience here in Columbia, as you heard, maybe you can bring him along and he ends up helping you and being one of those guys that just pops up and, here's, Kobe as a junior and now he's playing.
Sure.
He's a rotational type guy.
Yeah, honestly, listening to the conversation this morning, that's probably the first time people have probably thought about that name in a while because, again, he got hurt for last year and just, wasn't somebody on the field, wasn't somebody that got talked about much because he wasn't out there. But I mentioned this before I played the interview that, we're going into the season questioning, okay, who's that other edge rusher going to be? Again, we know Dylan Stewart's going to occupy one of those spots. We have a good feeling that Caleb Herring likely will be kind of that other guy that's, played the Kyle Kennard role or Brian Thomas Jr. role the past couple of years, but it's very much a wide open room. And again, it's going to be more than just those two guys playing. There's going to be rotations, and the question becomes of, okay, who are going to be the ones finding the way on the field, getting consistent snaps, coming off the edge, trying to get after the passers, and we'll see if Kobe can be one of those guys.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if it will be this year. Like if you're mapping it out right now, and keep in mind, Kobe says he's full go now, but remember back to the spring, like he's one of those guys that was still kind of coming along, and so it's not like we had a great look at him, and neither did the coaching staff, and he's not getting all the work that he needed to be getting at that point because of the recovering from the injury. But I say that to say maybe it's not this year. You know, maybe the guys that you just mentioned, Tyler, Stewart, Herring, Walker, Addison, maybe that kind of ends up being your top four. You typically, you might play 6 guys at edge, but the 2 on the back end of that are not going to play, a ton. So
Sure.
maybe we see him a bit. I hope we get to see him a bit, especially a guy that, has that athletic injury, but also, frankly, just missed last year with injury. You hope he can get back on the field and kind of get his first taste of college football. But I just think down the road, and if it's this year where he gets to play and do some things, great. I think maybe down the road, he's somebody that you look at as someone with potential and upside who can just continue developing.
So, again, I didn't know until you talked to him that he was originally from Ghana, because when you look at his Gamecocks Online profile, it just says Roswell, Georgia. So you have him, you have Neff Jiwa, we have Justin Okoronkwo, came from Germany. Is that the 3 international players? Do we have more?
I think that is it. I mean, do you count Kobe as an international player? I mean, he's been in the States quite a while.
He has.
International origins.
Yeah, and like being born in a different country. Again, Neff and Okoronkwo obviously only recently coming over to America, but I would count Kobe. And maybe there are more guys that we're just not aware of that come from different countries that we just don't talk about a whole lot. But 3 players with international-ish ties and none of them being punters is definitely unique. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, Tomi's father, Tomiwa Durajoye, his father is from Nigeria.
Okay.
But I think that Tomi grew up here.
Okay.
As far as I know, he did. So there's some international ties. But, yeah, I think those are the guys that were born internationally are the ones that you just mentioned. But, you mentioned the punter. Remember it's still a thing for sure, but for a while it was almost this trend, that's a better word than fad, of here's this Australian punter.
It's still going.
Still going. But, like, it was kind of had this novelty to it when it first came up. Oh, people are doing that now. And now this is becoming more common on the international front because you've got organizations like PPI,
sure,
NEF, JO, were part of that where, you're scouting in Germany, you're scouting in Africa, you got guys from Ireland, and you're going to see a lot more of this with guys who are international who maybe don't have much or any football experience coming over, learning the game. We saw a first-round pick this year of a guy who hadn't played football.
Yep.
Just has traits in the NFL.
I want to do a quick guys, name, and dudes here since we're talking about Australian punters. When I say Australian punter, is there a particular name that comes to mind first?
No, I'm thinking of one. Wasn't LSU one of the earlier ones?
Do you remember?
Yeah,
do you remember his name?
No, I can't come up with it.
Brad Wing.
Brad Wing.
Or number 38.
That's a good one. Yep.
Australian rules punter. Scored a touchdown once and got it taken off the board because he celebrated before he got to the end zone.
That is classic.
And
he didn't know the rules.
He didn't know the rules. And again, there's been a million Australian punters and it's still happening. But when I think Australian punter, he's still number 1 for me.
There's a bunch of them.
There are a bunch of them, and hey, they're good at their job. That's why they keep coming over here and taking the punting jobs. That'll do it for the Garnet Trust Hour. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday on the Game.
All right, guys, I'm going to tell you about our friends over at Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing. And as you have heard here on the program, the guys over at Krantz Cooling and Heating since 1983 have been providing HVAC services to Midlands residents and businesses, but also they've added plumbing recently. And they've now been to my home and Wes's home. Tyler, I get back from out of town, and I'm getting these emails saying, oh, it looks like you have a leak at your home. and that's not something that you want to come home to. So I checked below the house. There's a big leak. It's at night when I get back. Hard to find somebody. So what did I do? Hit up my guy Justin Krantz Cooling, Heating, and Plumbing. He sends somebody out the same night. Couple hours later, I am all fixed up. Told me some things that the previous folks had done wrong. Fixed my current problem. Now I'm back up and running. No more leaks. KrantzCooling.com. Check them out for plumbing needs too.
Uh, 11 o'clock on your Tuesday morning. Welcome in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you here on the game. A lot to get into this hour. We'll discuss, obviously, what Phil Still had to say about the Gamecocks yesterday on the early game with Elijah and Preston. We'll get into our 60 Days Trivia countdown in just a moment. But, Chris, we've been kind of on a run of guys naming dudes here as of late. I want to see if Wes is on the same wavelength as us on what we ended the last hour with. Wes, we were talking about Australian punters because of just the international players that Carolina has on the team. And there's one Australian punter that came to the top of both of our minds Didn't play for Carolina, but just in general, are you thinking of the same person when I say Australian puncher?
Oh, yeah. Hey, what does the last name start with?
I feel like that would be a giveaway.
Nah, I don't think so.
You don't think so? W.
Is it Brad Wing?
It's Brad Wing.
Ding,
we were all
ding,
thinking of the
ding.
same guy.
I couldn't come up with a name, but I was thinking of the guy. I feel like that kind of counts.
Yeah, I
Like,
know.
It's that guy.
I know he wasn't the first, but I feel like he was one of the most talked about.
Yeah.
Maybe, and he played for good LSU teams. That probably helped out too. But I felt like there were a lot of highlights or conversations about him, including when he got that touchdown taken away for celebrating before getting to the end zone. That, I don't know, just makes him most polarizing Australian puncher, I guess, maybe.
2025 all UFL punter, Brad Wing.
Oh, he's still going.
There you go.
Okay.
There you go.
San Antonio
There you go.
Brahmas.
Oh, well, all right then. I can tune into the UFL and watch Brad Wing still play, I guess.
Well, so an LSU jersey immediately popped to my mind.
Yes.
Yep.
And then you ever like just have a name pop up, but you're kind of fuzzy on, all right, is that the right name for the guy I'm seeing in my head? Like that was kind of where I was, which is why I wanted the confirmation on the last or the first letter of the last name. So
Okay.
Brad Wing, good call. Let's extend this out. Chris, I'm thinking of 2 number 60s for South Carolina football that immediately come to mind for me.
As am
Do
I,
you know-
actually.
Do what?
As am I. I'm also thinking of 2 different number 60s.
Okay. Let's see. Give me give them both to me.
Okay.
Right. I'm typing it in for confirmation. Chris, tell me who your number 60s are.
The first to be our guy, Terrence Campbell. And the second is Chris White.
You guys nailed it. Wow.
Same wavelength.
That's impressive.
Guys naming dudes.
Guys naming
We're better at this game than
You
all
got-
the other ones we play.
I'll say I should have, instead of trivia, I should have just gone guys naming dudes.
Just say,
Well,
all right.
I feel like we got to do this now. For every number.
Every number, guys naming
Moving
dudes.
forward.
Okay.
Yeah. So for confirmation, everybody, I'm holding up my
Yeah,
phone.
I
to
can
Tyler.
I can confirm those are the 2 names that he typed out.
Chris White, actually from Chester, South Carolina,
Yes.
lived on my late grandmother's street in Chester. My grandma and grandpa are from Chester as well. And so he was basically their neighbor. So I always pulled a little extra for Chris White, pride of Chester, South Carolina, which Clyde Wren is also one of the prides of Chester, South Carolina as well. So shout out there.
Chris is a good player. He was. He's solid. Very solid at Carolina.
Well-
Remington watch list guy.
Yeah.
Starter. Just very solid.
Well, neither one of those guys are the topic of
Oh, no.
today's 60 days until kickoff trivia.
Oh, man, hell yeah.
Look, we're still in the offensive lineman number, guys. We got to get creative. We're entering the 50s tomorrow, so we can expand more into defense and things like that with some of these guys. But
Yeah, 59. That's not going to be a good
59's like
number
a snapper number. You got some long snapper questions?
you'll have some linebackers at 59. That's not
some, yeah.
uncommon.
Yeah.
But I got a little more creative with this one. I talked about this in the 9 o'clock hour. 60 days represents 60 minutes, which is how long a football game is. And my question to you guys is, in the Beamer era, there's kind of a 2-parter here. In the Beamer era, how many game-winning scores have there been in the final minute of regulation for South Carolina to win? And can you tell me which games those were?
Oh, boy. How many and which ones?
In the final minute,
In the final minute of regulation for Carolina to win the game.
a score of any kind, so touchdown or field goal to win the game.
To win, and not a score to make it a 21-point game, a score to win the game in the final minute of regulation in the 5 years that Beamer's been head coach.
Man.
It's not a huge number, I will say that much.
Yeah. I mean, I had
I had two come to mind, two specific ones come to mind
Same.
immediately. And man, there's a third that came to mind that I'm kind of workshopping on. Did it fall within the minute? And I'm not sure if it did. So
Okay.
And then there's also part of me that's like, I'm probably forgetting an obvious one.
Yeah, that's going to be the bummer. There's certainly been a lot of close games.
There's been a lot of close
There's been a lot of fourth quarter games, both wins and losses. I'm going to say the two that I feel decently confident about, it might be the same ones as US. Maybe we can just work through it.
Okay.
So
Okay. You tell me one of them, I'll tell you the other one, because I think we're on the same.
So Missouri 2024 has got to be one.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And Vandy 2021
Yep.
has got to be one as well.
Okay.
Zeb Nolan to
Yes.
Leggett.
Yes. I don't know how I didn't think of that one. I actually thought of another one.
Oh, so you got another one.
Yeah, I have another one that I feel pretty good about, and that is
Okay. Let's just workshop it.
2020. That'll be 2021 East Carolina.
Okay.
Okay, that was the one that I was not positive if we were under the minute threshold.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it was, but I'm not sure. Those are the only ones that I really came to mind.
Confirm this. I should know this, guys. The Lenoris run against Clemson that was just over a minute, right?
That was just over a minute.
Yeah,
108
that does not
left in
count.
the fourth quarter. That does not count.
Okay. All right.
It was close.
We're gonna collab this one, Chris.
All right.
Do we think ECU? So we've got two for certain. I think. Do we think the ECU one was under a minute or over a minute? No. Was that?
What did you just think of?
That's a Parker White
Field goal.
Yeah. Was the game?
I think that might have been the last. Was that the last play of the game?
Yeah, so if
It's
the
under a
game was
minute.
tied and they kick a field goal to win it, that still counts,
That
right?
still counts. That's in the final minute
Okay.
of regulation.
All right. Yes, it's coming back to me. All right, Chris, you're either going with 3, or do we hedge because there's something obvious we're just forgetting and we say 4?
Well, we have to come up with the game though, right?
Yeah.
We can get a half. Yeah, I don't know.
You guys want to lock in those 3 answers?
Yeah.
You feel good
All
about
right.
that? All right, let's check your work.
Not really.
White says he's ready. Snap it back, put it down, kick it up, plenty of distance. Got it!
Good.
Parker White, yes you did. Yes you did. You took the Gamecocks to 2-0. Let's see what White can do. He's to the right of Zeb Nolan. 43 seconds remaining, down by 6. Nolan in the pocket, looking left side. Crossing route back in the end zone. Got him. Touchdown, Carolina. Touchdown, Xavier Leggett. Second down and 3. 22 seconds remaining. 2 timeouts. Blitz by Missouri. Shuffle pass inside. Sanders inside the 10. 5. Rocket going for it. Touchdown, Carolina. Touchdown, Rocket Sanders. From 15 yards out. The Gamecocks.
Whoa! Yeah!
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, no, hell no, we just scored.
ECU 2021, Parker White, field goal as time expires. Vandy 2021, Zeb Nolan to Xavier Leggett with 37 seconds left. And then Missouri in 2024, the Rocket Sanders touchdown with 15 seconds left on the clock.
Nice. Okay.
So how do we score this? You guys collaborated on that one.
Double points.
Double points.
We both get points.
I agree.
Oh, okay.
Fine with it.
All right, that's fine.
That one needed some teamwork. That was a
Yeah.
harder one.
Yeah, it was. I had to get creative with the number 60, and
No, I like that. I like that.
I felt like there was another one, but I triple checked on all these, and there wasn't. Those are the only 3 that happened in the final minute of regulation.
Nice. And guys, I think rather than just missing it, it's still better radio. It's better conversation if we just
Sure.
if we can collab and get there. Double points.
Yeah,
There you
totally.
go. That was a nice little trip down memory lane of the Beamer era so far, and some big moments. I don't know why I initially forgot that Parker White's field goal was like at the end of that game. And then I had like an image come in my mind of everybody on the Carolina sideline just like arms locked and just locked into Parker White, basically. So that was kind of a scary game looking back.
Oh yeah, no. Coming through the highlights of that, not comfortable up there, and it's green. Is it Greenville, North Carolina?
Yeah.
Greenville,
Okay, the other Greenville.
That game had some weird stuff. You had the opening first play from scrimmage, trick play, touchdown from ECU. Wes, didn't we get a Damani Staley pick six in that game, I believe?
Not only that, a Damani Staley pick six, I think at the end of the first half.
Yeah.
When ECU, honestly, ECU kind of controlled the game. And it's one of those things I'm sure the ECU coaches were like, you got to be kidding me. Like, that's the absolute, like, that was, you know how when fans get mad if a team kind of, we're just going to go to the half because we're happy where we are. That was the exact reason why coaches sometimes say, no, we're going to go to the half, because something like that can happen at the end. And then you had a Juju McDowell kickoff return for Carolina late in the game that set up the offense for points. So, yeah, that was that was game 2 of the Beamer era. So you're really talking about a team that was trying to find itself, roster that wasn't that great, and just it was kind of a mess.
Yeah, and it's always just weird anytime any Power 4, but especially an SEC school, goes on the road to a G5, like when Missouri went to UMass a couple of years ago. Like, just always, the optics of that always look kind of funny.
Yes.
So,
yes.
But yeah, there's your 3 final minute of regulation wins in the Beamer era. Who knows? Maybe more coming up this upcoming season. Phil Steele.
Good question, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you. Phil Steele was on with Elijah and Preston yesterday morning. What did he have to say about South Carolina? We'll dive into some of that coming up next. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Tuesday here on The Game.
We love telling y'all about companies, local businesses that we have had out to our homes, and tell you about another one that you hear about every day on the program. It's Integrated Media. Michael, Nathan, and the team at Integrated Media can come out to your home or even your business and make all of your tech and audio-visual dreams come true. Yeah, man caves, outdoor spaces, patios, wireless speakers, all that stuff. But even if you just have some problems that you need solved, if your internet isn't working properly, if you're a business owner and you don't have a great setup for your virtual and hybrid meetings at your business, check out their conference room solutions. Anything that you may need, from security and cameras, smart home systems, something as simple as mounting a TV, Integrated Media can take care of all of it for you. They can source the equipment and come out and professionally install it. They're your one-stop shop for all your tech needs. 803-948-8327 or integratedmediainc.com. Check them out today.
right, welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you here on your Tuesday on the game. Again, 60 days until South Carolina kicks off the season against Kent State. And, we have our benchmarks of the offseason of things we look forward to that indicate that the season is getting closer. Of course, SEC Media Days coming up in about 2 weeks. You, of course, have preseason camp in August. But a pinnacle moment in the middle of the summer is when Phil Steele drops his annual college preview magazine. It's been out for a little bit on digital, finally hit stores the other day at Barnes & Noble. I went and got my copy yesterday, and I don't know, there's an excitement level. It's like almost Christmas morning when you dive into a fresh Phil Steele and start learning about the upcoming season and all the teams and how much has changed this offseason.
Yeah, rite of passage. Always love it. I have an observation on some, and I'm probably kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but I think, Wes, that Phil, the last couple of years, has kind of pegged South Carolina, based on what he's thought. You remember 2023, Carolina's kind of flying under the radar. They gone 5-7. Not many people were believers. And even, heck, they start the season off, they're 3-3 going to Oklahoma. Ended up being a really, really good football team, narrowly missed the playoff. After that season, South Carolina is a nationally ranked team. They're getting some playoff buzz. Most of us here are kind of like, you should probably pump the brakes on that. And Phil Steele comes out, and, yeah, I'm not that high on South Carolina this year. They lost this, they lost that, pegged that too. And now, coming into 26 off another poor season, he seems to be, back on the South Carolina train, which I find interesting just because he's had a pretty good feel for it the past couple seasons.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I got my mag, too. Phil is pretty good, though, at playing the ebbs and flows of just natural college football. Like, if you win some close games one year, you might take a step back the next. If you lose close games, just playing the odds as opposed to, as fans, or if we're, kind of stuck into the local media, kind of like in the bubble, you maybe don't branch out a little bit from the bubble. So I think Phil does a great job of kind of sorting through everything and just telling you what trends apply to a particular team in a given year. And, I will say one thing, and again, for the most part, he got it right for last year. But as he said to Elijah and Preston, he felt it was more going to be about South Carolina's defense taking a step back, which I think we all thought that might be the case. And then, you watch the Virginia Tech game, and at the time we didn't realize Virginia Tech staff was going to get fired. And we're going, wait a second, this defense replaced a lot of people and still looks pretty dang good. And, for the most part, that kind of held true. Like, I think that was a great coaching job on the defensive side of the ball. And ultimately, it just came down last year to an offense that just could not get out of its own way. And so, I think Gamecock fans will probably feel a little bit good to know that Phil's projection sort of matches the hope for Gamecock fans. And the hope being that Lenora Sellers is the Lenora Sellers we saw at the end of that 2024, or even final half of that 2024 campaign.
Here is his full answer when asked at the beginning of their conversation why Gamecock fans should feel optimistic about going into the 2026 season.
Yeah, and this year I am bullish on South Carolina. I put them on my most improved list. 2 years ago, South Carolina was coming off a 5-7 season. I put them on my most improved list. They got to 9-4. Now, last year, South Carolina fans weren't too happy for me, or with me, I should say. I picked them low. They were considered a national title playoff contender, and I had them 10th in the SEC. But a lot of that was due to the defense. And, I thought they lost too much from the defensive front seven last year. And even even with that, you go back to the Alabama game. They led that thing 22-14, 10 minutes to go. They had a shot to win that. A&M up 30-3 at the half. Sorry to open up some wounds there, guys. But I think they're going to be improved, especially at that linebacker position. That's probably one of the more experienced units, probably the strength of the team this year. And then offensively, you got Lenore Sellers back. Remember, he got injured against Vanderbilt. Took a few games to get back. I think he's going to have the type of year more towards what he was playing at the end of 2024. And then let's look at the offensive line as well. Back in 24, they didn't have any injuries on the offensive line. They had one start missed all year. Last year, the injuries cropped up. They fired their OL coach mid-year. They dropped to 111 yards per game rush, allowed 43 sacks. I think if you look at the offensive line this year, they added 7 offensive linemen that were full-time starters. And really, when you add transfers, you want to add guys with experience. So I'm looking for a stock market bounce from that offensive line, a more improved run game, Lenore Sellers back to form, and a defense which was decent last year, but I think they're going to be better this year, especially at the linebacker core, the strength of the team. So add it all up, I'm much more bullish on South Carolina this year than I was last year.
So there's several layers to that. Sellers, linebackers, offensive line. We're going to have to kind of break this up into 2 segments. We can kind of get the Sellers thing out of the way really quick because, again, this is a conversation we've been having a lot this offseason. And, again, when you look at what Beamer did in hiring Kendall Browse, when you look at what's been put around him, including the offensive line, other help at skill positions as well, our hope and anticipation is that he does return to that form of what we saw at the end of the 2024 season and that Kendall Browse, removes all the bad things that Mike Shule had put in his head a season ago. Again, it's a wait and see, but we have a lot of optimism and belief that's going to happen. And again, when Sellers is playing his best, there are very few, if any, quarterbacks in the country that can be better than him.
Well, it's about getting Sellers back to, yes, playing how he was in 2024, but I think you go beyond the physical there and just go to the mental. When you looked at Lenore Sellers last season at many points, but especially I think in the back, half of the season, as things continue to go more and more poorly, there just wasn't a lot of confidence. And I think that was an entire team thing. But when you're the quarterback, that matters maybe more than any other position. You look back at last season, and to your point, Wes, like Phil Steele thought it was going to be a little bit more about the defense. It actually ended up being the offense. Even if you weren't super high on South Carolina's offensive prospects last season, you probably didn't see it going that poorly. I know I didn't. Speak for myself, I didn't. And you look back at the games last year, South Carolina didn't need to have an incredible offense to go win some of those games. They just needed to be, frankly, average in some situations. They needed to be more consistent. They needed to, stat we brought up a lot. There were 8 games last year where they didn't score in the fourth quarter. Score in the fourth quarter once in a couple of these games, and you've got some more wins. And so, look, you want South Carolina's offense, if you're a Gamecock fan, to be as good as it can possibly be this year. But can you just get to kind of a baseline level of performance? And if your defense can be as solid as we all think it can be, you're going to have an opportunity for more wins this season, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think one little sticking point for me with what Phil said, and I see why he's saying that about the linebackers, because you are probably one of the few teams in the country that brings back your top 3 linebackers who were kind of co-starters for those 2 spots from a year ago. So maybe he's right. Maybe that does end up being the strength or a strength of the team. But, I think we sort of go to that defensive tackle spot and say that that's the spot where we think there's maybe the best combination of starting talent, experience, and depth, kind of like all those things. And so, and I'm more talking in particular about the interior on the defensive line, which we know was a big strength for the 2024 team when they were really, really good. So, I think there's some little things that maybe we don't agree with completely, but ultimately those are the 3 big things Phil kind of harped on. But I think what really, if there was one big headline he kept going back to, it's the one that we've talked about also all offseason. It is, can you get this O-line going? And, I thought that was an interesting point too. We always talk about, can you build an O-line in 1 year through the transfer portal? And the fact that, a bunch of these guys were starters at their previous spot, and a bunch of these guys have experience. There was that graphic going around about South Carolina has arguably like the most experienced or the second or third most experienced offensive line in the country just by, I think that one was, can't remember if it was by snaps or by starts, but regardless, way up there in the country in terms of O-line experience.
We'll get more of what Phil Steele had to say yesterday talking to Elijah and Preston on the early game as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along on your Tuesday here on the game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris breaking down what Phil Steele had to say. Yesterday went on with Elijah and Preston in the morning, giving his thoughts on South Carolina with the recent release of his 2026 College Preview magazine. And again, I played that first question that he answered, that he kind of hit on a lot of the high points there of Sellers, the linebacker room, the offensive line. And he expanded on some of these more as the conversation went on, and he went deeper into his optimism about South Carolina and their portal-heavy offensive line.
Well, you have to factor in different things when you're looking for a bounce back year. And as mentioned, you go back to last year, there was plenty of injuries on the offensive line, and then firing the offensive line coach mid-year. So generally, you're going to see improvement. Now, I can tell you, being on the Joe Moore Award, the Joe Moore guys feel that the offensive line play overall in college football is down because of the transfer portal. There's not as much cohesion on the offensive line. It's tough to build. But when you look at South Carolina, the things I like is the fact that they brought in experienced guys who have started, and then you have those extended practices now where you can practice a little more over the fall to get together, cohesion, and then of course you've got all of August to get together. So I think we're going to see enough players come in where there's definitely going to be improvement on the offensive line, especially after what happened last year.
Harrison Lutheran of the Big Spur had an article a couple weeks ago that really kind of broke down that experience that Phil Steele is talking about there, and this being the most experienced group that Beamer's ever had with the offensive line. 48 years of combined college football experience with all the guys they brought in, 365 games and 206 combined starts. Now, again, not all those guys are obviously going to be playing and starting because there's only 5 spots on the offensive line, but it is significantly more than what you've had on a year in, year out basis since Beamer took over back in 2021. Again, that doesn't guarantee you're going to have success, but it's a good start in terms of how you want to build if you have to go portal heavy in the offensive line with so many guys that have played meaningful snaps in college football already.
Yeah, you kind of think about this thing as, year, say, 3 under Randy Clements and Jason Smith and Kendall Browse as you would think going to be better overall in terms of the quality than year 1. These guys were hired in the offseason. They've got some say in this thing, obviously, in terms of, okay, what does the personnel look like from last year's team? Who do we want to prioritize and keep? Are there guys that, maybe haven't played as much that we think can factor in a lot going forward? Obviously, regardless of who the OC was, who the O-line coach was, there were going to be some needs in the portal. So they were able to kind of put their stamp in some ways on that. They definitely brought in some experience, whether it's a guy like Carter Miller who's played at several schools and he's played multiple positions and he, has played solid at center, which is a position where you needed an upgrade, or getting a guy who was more of a household name like a Jacarius Beak, who was the number 1 offensive tackle in the portal, who a bunch of different schools wanted. You are plugging those guys in with the hope that, look, this room's been rebuilt. So, one of the things that we've heard, Wes, is it seems like the staff likes the mentality of this room, and that only gets you so far, right? But it is nonetheless an important part of it. The mentality, the experience level, the hunger, guys that have played a lot of football. Does that translate into the type of success that you need? We'll see. I think any time that you're cobbling together is kind of it sounds negative, and I don't mean it that way, but when you're building, I guess is a better word, when you're building an offensive line from the portal and it's year 1 and these are guys who are all going into a new system, even though they've played a lot, they're going in a new system, they're playing together, they're trying to gel, that can still create some challenges for you. But obviously some things had to change. Coaching, scheme, personnel, this was a full attack in the offseason by Shane Beamer to try to fix those things. And so obviously changing the personnel was going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, and, man, I think in a perfect world, maybe he wanted a guy or two additionally, to stay. But, we had someone on from Texas A&M last week, and they were saying, hey, Trevon Ball is probably a projected starter in College Station this year. So would that have made a little bit more smoother kind of transition to all this change? Possibly, but, it is what it is. And I do go back to the fact that you get Shed Surratt back and the fact that he really could play any position on the O-line. I think that helped smooth this thing out a little bit. I think he quietly is one of the most important guys on that entire offensive line because he can play guard for you. He can play either tackle spot for you. You know, I don't think he'll have to, but he could go play center for you and do very, very well, I think, at any of those spots. So I think that kind of raises the floor of that thing, because if you do have injuries, you have an ability to kind of move Shed around and play him wherever. You know, I think Nolan Hay coming back for a second year and providing, you know, some depth and competition at center is helpful too. So there is a decent little mix there of guys. Ultimately, I think some of it is going to come back to a big topic of conversation for Gamecock fans all offseason. Is Jacarius Peak healthy? Is he good to go? Is he, you know, even if he's healthy, is he back in like football shape? Is he able to perform at a high level? And I think if he is, then a lot of that spot kind of falls into place. Now, to Phil Still's point, got to keep him healthy, man. Like, that's not a spot, in my opinion, that you feel great about if you start having 1, 2, 3, 4, you know, injuries and start getting into your 7th guy, your 8th guy, your 9th guy on this list. I think they can make it work. I think they can be improved as long as they can avoid the injuries there. And I think, final point here, Tyler, I think the scheme helps them as well. Like, I think this scheme will naturally just take a little bit off the shoulders of your offensive line.
Yeah, the only downside you have with bringing in that many guys from the transfer portal is just lack of continuity, right? These guys haven't played together on offensive line, and again, they're going through spring practice. They're going to go through, preseason camp coming up here in a couple weeks, and they'll get the opportunity to play next to each other. But there's nothing quite like doing it in a game, and we'll see with Peak's injury. Is he coming back to start the season? Are you keeping him on the shelf for a couple more weeks to make sure he's 100% by the time SEC play rolls around? So it could take a little bit to get these guys all gelling the way you want an offensive line too, but again, that's just kind of a minor downside to what is a very experienced group that hopefully translates. Again, I've kind of set my expectation of if you can just cut the sacks in half from like what you had a year ago, you'd vastly improve, right? You don't have to be the best offensive line in the SEC, but being somewhere in the middle would be a lot better than what you've been giving this Carolina team in the past few years, and hopefully everything else would fall in line behind it.
Yeah, again, it goes back to what we were talking about, just bigger picture offensively last season. You didn't have to be a top 10 offense to go win a bunch more games. You just needed more consistency. There were games where you look up and, how's South Carolina running the ball? They're not at all, There was virtually no run game presence at times. You also have a quarterback that can make you right. 2024, South Carolina gave up a ton of sacks too. But that offense was more dynamic. Sellers was doing Sellers things. If you can just, and I don't know, I mean, Tyler, cutting it in half, that'd be a great outcome.
Maybe that's shooting a little
maybe
too
lofty.
High. Yeah.
But you make a good point. You got to cut down on the sacks, and that's everybody. Shane Beamer says that all the time. Like, that's Sellers, that's the backs. But it's Sellers having the confidence to be able to stand in there as well. But it starts up front. Everybody thinks about the O-line with sacks. There's a lot of truth in that, and you got to be able to run the ball more effectively too. Like, all these things work together. And again, you don't have to look up at the end of the season. You would love it if this happens, but you don't have to look up and say, okay, South Carolina was a top 10 rushing team. They were top 15 and least sacks allowed. I don't think you have to be there to have a really, really good season, but you've got to show some level of improvement. That's the hope.
Well, how about this for an example of how important that is? And this is from Phil Steele's magazine. Going back to 2024, South Carolina, during the first 7 games of that year, had allowed 32 sacks at that point in the season. This is the good year, the good season, 2024. Well, we know how much better they got down the stretch. 7 total sacks during the final 6 games of the year. So you cut. Now, some of that was Lenoris just being Superman and getting out of would-be sacks, against Texas A&M, against Missouri, against Clemson. But again, it all go hand in hand. So if you're averaging essentially a little over 1 sack a game for the offense, then all of a sudden, like, you're not behind the chains. You're not. I mean, if you're an offense that's not incredibly explosive and you get yourself behind the chains like that, like it happens so often then it's really hard to be consistent on offense.
We'll see if Phil Steele's right about it. Again, 60 days until kickoff with Carolina and Kent State. Come back, wrap up the hour. Unfortunately, the men's national team run came to an end last night. We'll talk about it up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. All right, welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West, Chris, wrapping up the hour here on your Tuesday on the game. You know, this is typically the spot where I play like a highlight of the game we're about to talk about. Unfortunately, not really many highlights from last night's World Cup game between the U.S. men's national team and Belgium, as unfortunately the fun run comes to an end once again in the round of 16 for the U.S., though with the expanded tournament, they did actually win a knockout game this time in the round of 32 over Bosnia. But, not a fun one to watch last night when Freeze gave up that goal to make it 3-1. I think it was the 56th or 57th minute. I think we kind of all knew it was probably over from there. Belgium will get one more to make it 4-1. But, not a fun way to end things for the U.S. last night.
Not at all. And you kind of felt, Belgium is... there's a point they made on the broadcast last night. There's still a top 10 European team, still a top 10 team in the world. Still a really good team. Are they what they were? Maybe not. Some of their stars have aged, but they also, look at who they brought off the bench. They bring on Jeremy Doku off the bench. KDB didn't even play. You bring in Lukaku, who is still, he got the fourth goal. He's still a guy who can come in and score late, that's what he does. And it was a different type of challenge. It was a better team than the U.S. has played so far, I think. Belgium had not been that impressive in the group stage, and they had to come from behind in their first knockout game. And the U.S. have been playing quite well for the most part. When they had their full squad, they've been playing very well. But I think all their warts were exposed last night, mainly defensively, and Belgium just kind of outclassed them. It was such a disappointing performance because, if it was just a great back and forth game and, the U.S. had just maybe conceded a goal late or just couldn't quite put one in the back of the net and you lose by a goal, okay, great run. Unfortunately, you saw Belgium look like, just put forth like a very professional, that's what they do type performance. And the U.S. just didn't play well. Just didn't play well at all. Their only goal was on the set piece. Give Tillman credit for hitting it, but it took a deflection.
They got a little assistance.
And frankly, you gave Belgium 2 goals. You gave them 2 goals. And then the other 2 looked preventable, And so that was the disappointing part. You had the 2 later goals are just giveaways, basically.
Yep.
Just mess ups. Even the first 2, one of them, U.S. has 3 guys around the ball. Nobody clears it, gets back into the box, gets crossed, it's in the back of the net. And you just can't make those mistakes against a team that's that good. So, yeah, it was an incredibly frustrating watch. The deflation on social media was something to behold because everybody felt great. There's all these jokes flying. And then after that, it's right back to,
see in 4 years.
Back to the drawing board. How are we going to start fixing youth soccer so we can make sure this thing gets better? It is incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, it was still fun, right? Even though I think we all knew that the likelihood of them winning this whole thing was very low, being able to follow this for the past couple weeks, especially in the midst of summer where there's not a whole lot of other things going on, at least kept us occupied and entertained for a few weeks, right?
Yeah, it was cool. It was fun. I can't tell you still anything about soccer, so I'm not going to pretend to analyze what happened. But I did watch. I was hoping for a different result. That's about all I got.
Yeah, fair enough. And maybe it's because of how well they played in the group stage, minus the last game against Turkey, which was inconsequential, all things considered. But maybe that drummed up like more belief, because again, they've been in plenty of World Cups over the years, typically ending in the round of 16. But maybe that group stage play and winning 3 games in a row, which is something they'd never done before, maybe garnered some kind of belief in us that we typically just don't have with the men's national team that made this more fun than years past.
Well, I think the team was playing better. Like, that wasn't just an illusion.
Yeah.
They were playing better. The performance that they put forth in the group stage was the best that we've seen. That's just statistically, it is what it is. But you knew as you get deeper into this thing, it's just going to get tougher. And so this was the big test, and they didn't pass it. And, I think if the U.S. had played the type of game that they have been playing, it's a different outcome. But if you bring a a C or D game, which is, I mean, they probably brought like a D game against Belgium, you are going to lose. And that's exactly what happened. So very disappointing. You know, there's a lot left to say about it, but man, I'm just disappointed that it's ending because it's fun. I'm going to watch the rest of the tournament.
Sure. Yeah,
it's been a great tournament.
I've been more into the entire thing than I have been in years past.
I think that's a lot of people.
Maybe because of what the U.S. is doing. But, yeah, some great games. The England-Mexico game was great the other day. Some great environments around the country. And, 2 more weeks until we decide who the World Cup champion is. But that'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show up next as your Tuesday rolls along here on The Game.